Hi, I'm here at the Linux Foundation Conference in Brazil, and I'm here with Ric Wheeler, who manages all the file system developers at Red Hat. Hi, Ric.
Hi, good morning.
So, Ric, can you tell us, how did you get into doing file system development, and how did you end up where you are at Red Hat?
Well, a long time ago, I was in the early 80s, I went to Brandeis University, and in my last year, the system administrator fled in the middle of the year. They asked me to take over running the systems, which were Berkeley Unix at the time, and promised me to give me passing grades and an A on my senior thesis if I took the job. That's how I got started.
So it was a bribe, basically.
It was a bribe.
Yeah,
I was bribed into doing it. And at Brandeis, I studied Middle Eastern studies and computer science. So the only logical thing to do was to go to the Middle East and do computing. So I moved to Israel after I graduated and worked on a project called MOSIX, which was a Unix-based distributed process migration scheme. That was quite a lot of fun. It was based, again, on Berkeley Unix. Actually, we started with version 7 Unix. And back then, you couldn't actually share the code. So what we did is we wrote a very detailed book taking off on Maurice Bach's design and implementation of Unix, saying, well, we can just publish the delta.
Oh, it's kind of like the Lions book, you mean?
Well, Lions was before that, and
cool.
then Bach did a book when he was at AT&T, which basically captured all of his training materials. And that's one of the things I did as a graduate student, is they asked us, actually a friend of mine, Dalia Malki, who's at Microsoft Research, her husband's at Google, Yoram Singer. But Dalia and I were asked, how much would it cost us to have you write the answer set for the design and implementation of Unix? And we took one of the chapters and did it in an afternoon and said, great, this is really easy. We'll ask for $1,000 each. And Maurice, who goes by Moshe now, Bach, said, that's fantastic. You guys can have the job. And 3 months of mind-numbingly boring answering later, we were done.
Right.
At the usual open source rate of nickels an hour.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, the Lions book was actually an early photocopy of the source code of the Unix system. And it was passed down through many, many generations of photocopies to students. In fact, when the Lions book was finally published in the US, the cover shows, the picture on the cover shows various students surreptitiously photocopying a book on a university photocopy. In fact, I had a sort of 100th or so generation photocopy of the Lions book way before I came to the US. So you were telling me earlier they gave you a passing grade on your thesis?
Yes, I got an A. My thesis was using Prolog to parse Hebrew and translate it into Arabic, and it was great because no one in the computing department spoke Arabic, and no one in the Middle Eastern Studies department understood what computers were, so whatever came out was wonderful.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Everything that comes out, that's automatically perfect Arabic. So
yes, it was.
The earliest perfect machine translation.
Yes, yeah. And for my toy examples, it worked perfectly. Yeah.
So how did you end up at Red Hat?
Well, Red Hat, I came to Red Hat after spending 10 years at EMC. I was at EMC as their kind of Linux advocate and open source person. So I worked in building storage arrays. I worked 5 years in Symmetrics engineering as a storage architect. Mm-hmm. And then I worked 5 years in Centera, which was a Linux-based cluster that did object-based storage. So actually at Linux Collab Summit, or one of our Linux Foundation events, I saw Brian Stevens, who I've known for many years. And I poked at Brian and said, if you ever get serious about doing file systems, let me know, and I'll consider jumping ship. And he said, oh, yeah, we'd love to have you. And so I had to go home and tell my wife. He said yes.
We're moving to North Carolina.
Boston. I still live in Boston.
So what actually made you interested in working on Linux versus working on any of the proprietary systems? I mean, what was it about it that actually caught your imagination?
I have to confess, I did start in the 80s and 90s as a FreeBSD person.
Sacrilege.
It's another great community, which, in many ways has kind of gone by the by, I think. I mean, even in the embedded space, people are using Linux increasingly, as you'll see with Android and things. But Linux was obviously the place to go. So we actually, one of the first things I did at EMC was to pay to port my BSDI-based MOSIX system, which the Hebrew University had done. We gave them a grant and said, if you port it to Linux, we'll pay for your lab for a year or so. So we funded a port to Linux. We open source MOSIX with EMC funding, and we went and took a MOSIX-based build cluster running on Linux to 14 kernels and cut our build times down from several hours to 15 minutes.
Wow.
So that was my first big Linux project, I suppose.
So it was basically the fact that you were funded to do it, or was there anything else about the community or the project itself that actually, got you interested?
I prior to coming to EMC, I'd actually spent 4 years at the Open Software Foundation's Research Institute, and we'd actually done Linux work there. So we did the first PowerPC McLinux. If you remember that?
Yes, I do remember.
A long time ago. That wasn't me, but I did. I was one of the Unix server people who helped gut the VM system to run on Mach, which had a perfect VM system, so you didn't need the Linux one. Didn't go very far, as I recall.
Yeah.
But so I've been in an open source community, more or less. It was previous to your other things, or in a research-funded grant organization, which is kind of the same. The way DARPA-funded research grants work is the government gives you piles of money for 2 or 3 years. You go off, you do your work. You're free to do whatever you want with your source code, as long as the measure of how successful you are is whether or not you've been able to turn it into something that people use.
Right.
Just kind of neat. And if they don't see useful uptake in the industry, they cut your funding off and go find someone else.
Right.
So we've done that with Linux. We've done it with OSF1. And I knew a lot of Linux people. I mean, at that time, I think the FreeBSD and Linux communities were not that far apart. I mean, we were all at the same conventions and, very similar spirit, I think.
Yeah.
So I came into it gradually.
So where do you think Linux is going? I mean, what's your vision of where it will be in the future? Where do you think it will be more important on embedded devices? It's already pretty active in large server clusters. What about the desktop? Is there a chance for the Linux desktop?
Yeah, the desktop's a challenge. Of course, I use a Linux desktop, and I have a Linux desktop
so do
on my
I.
laptop, on my home machines, everything else. I think it's a hard slog. I think the Linux desktop would probably become more popular in embedded tablet devices. So I think the desktop might actually migrate towards the embedded space. I mean, say an Android-based tablet might be one of the ways the desktop becomes irrelevant. Right, the traditional home desktop for end users, it's all ease of use and functionality. Most people don't use more than video conferencing, email, and web browsing.
Yeah.
I think an Android-based tablet that has no keyboard, very little spinning hard drive would be one way the desktop based on Linux would become incredibly popular.
So in other words, the computer will fade into the desktop, and it'll be like the original Tron David Warner desktop, where he types on a beautiful glass.
Yes, no keyboards.
Yeah, no keyboard. Types on a beautiful glass desk, and then there he is. His computer is all around him.
My other famous experience with Hollywood was I spent 4 years at Thinking Machines building supercomputers, and we were the backdrop in the Jurassic Park movie.
Oh, wow.
We were the evil supercomputer. And so our field engineers actually went and set up for Spielberg the CM5 empty cabinets. They were $30, $40 million machines, but we gave them the empty cabinets with red blinking lights and had the field engineers set up the SGI desktop, where the famous scene is the girl comes up and yells, "Oh, I know this is Unix."
Not much like any Unix I'd seen at the time, but
yes.
But that was IRIX for you.
That was IRIX, yes.
Yes. So, anyway, thank you very much for talking with us. That's been really interesting. You've had a fantastic career. Very interesting. And hopefully not finished yet. So
hopefully not. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.